Noble Fire Brigade. Within an hour, the gallant band were pouring in on every hand. From Putney, Hackney Downs and Bow, with courage high and hearts aglow, they galloped, roaring through the town. Matilda's house is burning down. Inspired by British cheers and loud, proceeding from the frenzied crowd, they ran their ladders through a score of windows on the ballroom floor and took particular pains to souse the pictures up and down the house, until Matilda's aunt succeeded in showing them they were not needed. And even then she had to pay to get the men to go away. It happened that a few weeks later, her aunt was off to the theater to see that interesting play, The Second Mrs. Tanqueray. She had refused to take her niece to hear this entertaining piece, a deprivation just and wise, to punish her for telling lies. That night, a fire did break out. You should have heard Matilda shout. You should have heard her scream and bawl and throw the window up and call to people passing in the street, the rapidly increasing heat inspiring her to obtain their confidence, but all in vain. For every time she shouted, "Fire!" they only answered, "Little liar." And therefore, when her aunt returned, Matilda and the house were burned.
If you are wondering what that uplifting little cautionary verse from Mr. Hilaire Belloc has to do with our present subject, I will tell you. It deals with an apocalyptic conflagration. An apocalyptic conflagration. That's a phrase you don't get to say very often. I'm going to say it again. An apocalyptic conflagration. The final fire that ends the world, or the fire that finally ends the world, or the fire that reveals everything. Final, as in the Last Judgment. Revealing, as in the Last Judgment. Back when I was growing up evangelical, I certainly shared the evangelical obsession about the end of the world, and a particular theology regarding the second coming that involves something called the rapture. I had a famous brother-in-law who wrote a famous song about the rapture and ended it with the line, "You've been left behind." To his credit, he was the one who introduced me to G.K. Chesterton. To his debit, unfortunately, those two words, "left behind," formed the basis for a mega-selling series of schlock fiction. Since then, the world has continued coming to an end. And we continue to be in the last days. In fact, this kind of literature was around even in Chesterton's time and was popular then, too. He found the popularity of these books about the second coming fascinating.
Such books tend, in my view, too much to suggest that Christ's second visit to the earth occurs because his first visit was ineffectual. And even the second visit is rather ineffectual, too. And yet it cannot be entirely ineffectual if millions of people want to go on reading even a fiction about it.
But it's not just the evangelicals that are obsessed with the end of the world. So are the environmentalists. In the 1970s, scientists were convinced that the world was going to end in ice. Now, of course, they're convinced that it's going to end in fire, global warming, an apocalyptic conflagration. That's great, I got to say it again. In either case, there's this sense of doom that haunts the earth, whether it's Protestant predestination or scientific materialism. The doom is determinism, the idea that there's no freedom in the universe. It is, as Chesterton points out, contrary to Catholic thinking.
The Catholic Church believes that man and God both have a sort of spiritual freedom. Calvinism takes away the freedom from man, but leaves it to God. Scientific materialism binds the Creator himself. It chains up God as the Apocplypse chained the devil. It leaves nothing free in the universe. And those who assist in promoting this understanding of God are called liberal theologians.
What does Chesterton say about the apocalypse and the end of the world? In his novel, The Ball and the Cross, which ends with an apocalyptic conflagration, the character of MacIan makes a rather amazing statement.
An apocalypse is the opposite of a dream. A dream is falser than the outer life, but the end of the world is more actual than the world it ends.
In other words, we're talking about ultimate reality. Chesterton lists the essential elements of biblical apocalypse: the breaking of seals, the opening of vials, the rending asunder of the heavens, when that which is said in the inner chamber shall be proclaimed on the housetops. The images in the Revelation to St. John have, of course, fascinated and puzzled Christians for centuries and have certainly produced some strange interpretations. Chesterton says that although St. John saw many strange monsters in his vision, he saw no creature so wild as one of his own commentators. There is, of course, a terrifying element to the monsters of the apocalypse, not merely the bad ones, but even the good ones, with their many eyes and many wings all around the throne of God.
I like those monsters beneath the throne very much, but I do like them beneath the throne. It is when one of them goes wandering in deserts and finds a throne for himself that evil faiths begin, and there is literally the devil to pay. As long as those misshapen elemental powers are around the throne, remember that the thing that they worship is the likeness of the appearance of a man. All really imaginative literature is only the contrast between the weird curves of nature and the straightness of the soul. Man may behold what ugliness he likes if he is sure that he will not worship it. But there are some so weak that they will worship a thing only because it is ugly. It is not always wrong even to go, like Dante, to the brink of the lowest promontory and look down at hell. It is when you look up at hell that a serious miscalculation has probably been made.
One of Chesterton's most fascinating references to the apocalypse is one of the very last pieces of fiction that he ever wrote, a story called The Three Horsemen of the Apocalypse. It appears in his collection, The Paradoxes of Mr. Pond. There's something certainly far-reaching and uncanny about this tale. The very title suggests something both monumental and prophetic. There's an important character central to the story, but we never actually meet him. His name is Paul Petrovsky, the poet from Krakow. And he combines being a poet with being a patriot. He's a torch and a trumpet of revolutionary hopes. And he's suddenly thrust upon the international stage, and his enemies worry about his influence because they know that a poet or a prophet could be as dangerous as an army, and they resolve to kill him. But they fail. A generation after this story was written, there would actually arise a poet from Krakow who would become an international figure, a torch and a trumpet of revolutionary hopes. And he would occupy the chair of Petrov, or Peter. And his name was Paul, as in John Paul. And his enemies recognized that he was as dangerous as an army, and they would try to kill him, and they would fail. What did G.K. Chesterton see with his bright, dying eyes? A week before he died, this is what Chesterton wrote.
I willingly admit that I may be wrong in my guesses about what will occur or may occur, so long as there is no mistake or misrepresentation about my view of what ought to occur. I have never set myself up to be a prophet. Concerning the things I defend, such as distributism, I maintain that they should exist, not that they must exist or will exist.
Chesterton is prophetic, but like any prophet, he's always much less concerned with what will be than with what should be. It all comes back to free will especially in the face of doom. Chesterton is never one to use the inevitable as the excuse for anything, whereas in today's world we tend to use the inevitable as the excuse for everything. Christ said there would be wars and rumors of wars, and so we resign ourselves to war, or in some cases we precipitate war. There are even those who would hasten Armageddon so that they can hasten the end of the world. G.K. Chesterton is certainly no pacifist. He certainly defends the right of a nation to fight a war of defense, but he also knows that there is a way to avert war if we really want to avert war. He says the way to avert war is to attempt to understand the patriots of the other country. He makes it clear that whether it is domestic policy or international policy, there can be no peace without justice. And that is why peace is sometimes disrupted in order to obtain justice. But we should never stop working for justice. There are horrible sins against what is good and what is just throughout the world today, provoking images that seem to be glimpses of hell. And even if I were to list them, well, I might start sounding apocalyptic. But as bad as they are not the end of the world. We can avert war. But an even odder thing is, we can even avert the end of the world. That is, we can at least delay it. The world ends only when God, in His infinite patience, makes the decision that even He has been patient long enough. Of that day or hour, no one knows. We can continue to enjoy His created world by delaying Armageddon, by delaying apocalyptic conflagration. We can do it by transforming the culture. In order to transform the culture, we need a revival. In order to have a revival, we need repentance. The paradox about the end of the world is the same paradox about life and death. We don't seek death, even if it is the door to heaven. We seek life, and we pass from life unto life. We don't seek the end of the world, even if it means the final fulfillment of God's plans. We preach the coming of the kingdom of God and the coming of Christ. And in the meantime, we build up the kingdom, soul by soul, and we carry Christ with us throughout the world. The apocalypse, in terms of thunderous judgment, is delayed. The apocalypse, in terms of revelation, is already here. God has revealed Himself in the flesh. The point is, we always have to be ready to stand before Christ. In 1932, Chesterton was asked to write an article for Good Housekeeping. Good Housekeeping. And the title of the article was, If Christ Should Come. His answer to the question probably surprised a lot of people.
If I am to answer the question, how would Christ solve modern problems if He were on earth today? I must answer it plainly. And for those of my faith, there's only one answer. Christ is on earth today, alive on 1,000 altars. And He does solve people's problems, exactly as He did when He was on earth in the more ordinary sense. That is, He solves the problems of the limited number of people who choose of their own free will to listen to Him.
The saint is always standing before Christ. It's a position of humility, to be sure, but also of confidence and joy. Those are certainly qualities that describe G.K. Chesterton: humility, confidence, and joy. Chesterton's first major book was on the English poet Robert Browning. The book, which was supposed to be nothing but a literary biography, was in fact much more, and the reviewers knew it. And one of those reviewers was the poet Alfred Noyes.
The book is a little apocalypse, sensationally significant and profound. Chesterton's cry throughout is, "I intend to get to God." And that, in brief, is what he wishes the rest of the world to do.
Chesterton is trying to get us to God. Incidentally, Alfred Noyes would eventually be received into the Catholic Church as a result of Chesterton's influence. G.K. Chesterton is indeed an apocalyptic writer. Some writers who are considered apocalyptic are focused on the darkness, whereas Chesterton is focused on the light. He's aware of the dark forces of evil, but the evil is not the ultimate truth, so it cannot be the ultimate vision. Light conquers the darkness. That is the true apocalyptic vision. The subject of the end of the world and the final judgment is brought up